The Galactic Conclave had been around for a very long time. 11,000 years, to be exact. In all those years, the Conclave had seen a lot of things. New stars being born. Old ones dying. Wars between species that lasted centuries. Peace treaties that lasted longer. The Conclave had welcomed dozens of new civilizations into its ranks, some of them strange, some of them beautiful, some of them a little frightening at first. But every single one of them had come from inside the known galaxy. Every one of them had been found, catalogued, and quietly observed before they ever knew the Conclave existed. That was the way it worked. That was the way it had always worked. So when the signal arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning by station time, nobody was ready for it. Ambassador Vekra was the one who brought it to the attention of the Grand Assembly. She was a Cerinthian, tall, blue-scaled, with 6 long fingers on each of her 3 hands and eyes the color of warm gold. She had been an ambassador for over 40 years and had handled stranger situations than most. But when she stood at the center of the assembly hall and read out the details of the signal, even she seemed a little unsure of herself. The signal had come from beyond the outer void. That alone was enough to make the hall go very quiet. The outer void was not a place anyone went. It was a wide belt of dead stars and broken space that sat at the edge of the known galaxy like a wall nobody had ever thought to climb. The radiation out there was enough to cook the electronics in any ship. The gravitational currents could pull a vessel apart before its crew even knew something was wrong. Every species in the Conclave had mapped the void's edge at some point. Every species had looked at the data and decided it was not worth the trouble. The void was simply where the known world ended. And yet something had come from the other side of it. Vekra explained what the signal contained. It was not complicated. It used simple radio waves, the kind of communication that every spacefaring civilization went through at some point in its early development, before learning about faster and better methods. The signal held basic mathematical patterns. Prime numbers. Simple geometric ratios. The universal language of, we are here and we are thinking beings. It was the kind of message a civilization sent when it was new to the stars and was not yet sure if anyone else was out there. Elder Thacid, who represented the Murin Collective and was one of the oldest members of the Conclave, pressed 2 of his front tentacles together. His kind did that when they were deeply worried. Nothing crosses the void, he said. His voice was low and careful. The radiation alone would destroy any ship we know of. The journey would take centuries even under the best conditions. He let the words sit in the air for a moment. Unless, he added, the beings who sent this signal did not see those conditions as a problem. Nobody said anything after that for a while. That evening, a young analyst named Paris filed his report. He was a Dothian, 4-legged, quick-eyed, and good at the kind of patient number work that other species found boring. He had spent the whole day going over the signal data, running calculations, checking them again. What he found was this: the signal had come from a small yellow star sitting deep inside a radiation zone near the void's inner edge. The star had planets. One of them sat in the narrow band of distance where liquid water could exist on a surface. The planet had a thick atmosphere, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, with a little carbon dioxide mixed in. It had oceans. Big ones. Paris added a few extra notes at the bottom of his report. He wrote them almost apologetically, as if he was not sure they belonged in an official document. The planet's gravity was strong, significantly stronger than average. Its axis was tilted at a sharp angle, which meant its seasons were extreme. Its star regularly produced solar flares powerful enough to strip the atmospheres of nearby moons. And the planet sat in a part of space where asteroid impacts had been historically common. Any creature that had evolved on that world, Paris wrote carefully, would have needed to be extremely tough just to survive. The report was reviewed by 3 senior researchers the next morning. All 3 of them read the extra notes at the bottom. None of them said much about it out loud. But one of them made a copy of the report and quietly sent it to every member of the Conclave's Science Council with a short message attached: please read this before we go any further. Back in the assembly hall, Vekra was already preparing the next step. The Conclave's policy on first contact was clear. You did not wait. You sent a diplomatic ship. You went to meet whoever was coming and you introduced yourself before they arrived at your door confused and possibly armed. It was the polite thing to do. It was also the safe thing to do. You wanted to set the tone early. The ship chosen for the mission was the Serene Dawn, a mid-sized diplomatic vessel with good shielding, comfortable meeting rooms, and a crew that had handled difficult first-contact situations before. Its captain was a Cerinthian named Ilara, who had gray-blue scales and a reputation for staying calm when things went sideways. She read the briefing files on the incoming vessel twice before departure. The alien ship was big and heavy. Its hull was thick in a way that spoke less of elegance and more of stubbornness, as if whoever built it had decided the best answer to a dangerous universe was to make the walls thicker. It ran on a fusion drive that burned hotter and messier than anything in the Conclave's current fleet. It was not beautiful engineering. But it had crossed the outer void. That meant something. Ilara stood on the bridge of the Serene Dawn as it moved into position to intercept the incoming vessel and thought about the notes at the bottom of Paris's report. A high-gravity world. Extreme seasons. Regular solar flares. A belt of radiation that would kill most known species in minutes. She thought about what kind of creature grew up in a place like that. She thought about what it would mean that such a creature had looked up at the stars, built a ship, crossed the worst stretch of space in the known galaxy, and sent a polite radio message saying hello. The Serene Dawn's sensors picked up the alien vessel clearly now. It was still several hours away. Its fusion torch burned at the back of it like a small, very determined star. It was not slowing down in any nervous or cautious way. It was moving at a steady, confident pace, the pace of something that had come a long way and knew exactly where it was going. Ilara told her crew to prepare the observation chamber and make sure the atmospheric systems were working. Then she went to her cabin, sat down at her desk, and read Paris's report one more time from the beginning. Outside her window, the void sat dark and wide, and somewhere inside it, the newcomers kept coming. The Serene Dawn held its position at the edge of the void for 6 hours before the alien vessel came close enough for visual contact. Captain Ilara watched it on the bridge screen and said nothing for a long moment. The ship was not what anyone had expected. It was large and blocky, with a hull that looked like it had been welded together in sections, thick plates of gray-white metal layered over each other like the scales of some enormous creature. There were no smooth curves, no elegant lines. It was built the way something is built when the people building it are more concerned with whether it will hold together than with how it looks. The sensors confirmed what the earlier data had suggested. The hull was dense. The shielding around the engine section was heavy enough to handle radiation levels that would have been a serious problem for most conclave vessels. The drive itself was still burning, a hot, slightly irregular fusion flame that threw more light than it needed to. Ilara's chief engineer, a precise Thrak named Ven, watched the engine data quietly and then said that the humans had clearly built their ship for the journey they were actually going to take, not the journey they wished they were taking. It was a practical compliment. Ven was not the kind of person who gave other kinds. The first transmission from the alien ship came through at close range, in the same simple radio wave format as the original signal. The Conclave's translation system had been working on the language since the signal was first received. It was hard going. The lead linguist, a Valorian named Sue, described the language as dense and irregular, full of exceptions to its own rules, with meaning that shifted depending on tone and context in ways that were difficult to model. She said it felt old. Not old like a formal language that had been kept clean and organized over centuries, but old the way a river is old. It had been running for so long that it had carved its own shape into everything around it. After 3 hours the translation came through clearly enough to read. The message said, "We are humanity. We come from the planet Earth. We received your transmissions and we wanted to say hello. We hope you are friendly. We brought food, just in case you are not." Ilara read it twice. Then she asked Ven if the last part was a translation error. Ven checked and said it was not. The humans had apparently brought extra supplies in case things went badly. Ilara was quiet for a moment. She decided that this was either a very reassuring thing or a slightly alarming thing, and that she would not know which until she met them in person. The docking took 40 minutes. The alien vessel was too large to bring inside the Serene Dawn, so the two ships connected at their airlocks and the humans came through a short pressurized corridor into the observation chamber that Ilara's crew had prepared. The chamber was wide and well lit, with a long table and chairs of various shapes to accommodate different body types. One wall was a full observation window that looked out into open space. The atmospheric mix had been carefully calibrated to be comfortable for both Cerenthian biology and what the sensor data suggested human biology would need. The 4 humans who came through the airlock did not look like what most of the Conclave crew had been quietly imagining. They were roughly the same height as Cerenthians, but heavier in the shoulders and chest. They moved easily, not the careful, deliberate movement of someone trying not to trip in low gravity, but the easy, natural movement of people who were comfortable in their own bodies. They were wearing simple gray flight suits. 3 of them had taken off their helmets. The 4th, a tall, broad man named Cole, was still holding his, looking around the observation chamber with an expression of open, relaxed interest. When he spotted the observation window and the stars beyond it, he stopped and stared for a moment. "Oh," he said quietly. "That is something." He said it the way someone says something when they have already seen many impressive things in their life and are not easily surprised, but are still genuinely happy to be surprised when it happens. The team leader introduced herself as Dr. Nina. She was not the tallest of the 4, but there was something about the way she stood that made her seem like the center of the room. She had short dark hair, a calm and direct way of speaking, and the kind of eyes that watched everything without making it obvious. She extended one hand toward Ilara, palm out, in the greeting gesture the briefing notes had described. Ilara had 3 hands and none of them were quite the right shape for the motion, but she did her best. Nina smiled. She had a lot of teeth. All 4 of them did, more than most conclave species and much harder looking. The other 2 team members were introduced as Dr. Lena, the mission physician, and a quiet man called Ray, who was listed as the mission's navigation and communication specialist. Ray shook hands with everyone, said very little, and then spent most of the next hour standing near a corner of the room looking at the star charts on the wall with the focused attention of someone memorizing a map. The first formal session that afternoon was supposed to be introductory. Ilara had planned it as a slow, comfortable exchange, the kind of meeting where nothing important gets decided but both sides get a feel for each other. What actually happened was that the humans asked questions. Not rude questions, but steady and direct ones, the kind that went straight to the point without any of the diplomatic softening that conclave meetings usually involved. Cole asked about the technical specifications of the Serene Dawn's drive system within the first 20 minutes. Nina asked how the conclave's decision-making process worked and who actually held the power when a vote was close. Lena asked Tavi, the young Cerenthian biologist who had come as part of the science observation team, whether her species used the same base chemicals in their biology as the creatures on her homeworld, or whether life on different planets had developed different foundational systems. Tavi answered all of Lena's questions carefully and accurately, and afterward went and found Ilara in the corridor to quietly report that the humans seemed to already know quite a lot about xenobiology for a species that had only recently become spacefaring. Ilara asked what Tavi meant. Tavi said that the questions Lena was asking were not beginner questions. They were the questions of someone who had already thought hard about the subject and was now looking for specific pieces of information to fill in gaps. Ilara thought about that for a moment. Then she went back into the observation chamber where the humans were still talking and laughing with members of her crew as though they had known each other for years. Ray had found a star chart he liked and was showing Cole something on it, pointing at a section of the void they had just crossed with the calm, matter-of-fact gesture of someone pointing at a road they drive on every morning. Ilara watched them and thought about Paris's report again. A world of extreme gravity, fierce weather, and radiation from above. A species that had evolved there, survived there, and then decided to cross the worst stretch of space in the galaxy to come and say hello. She thought she was beginning to understand something about these people. She was not entirely sure yet whether it made her feel better or not. By the second day, the conclave science team had gathered enough data to start putting together a real picture of what humanity was. They had not done anything invasive. The scans were all passive, the kind that ran quietly in the background and gathered information without the subject ever knowing. It was standard first contact procedure. Every species that came through the conclave's doors got the same treatment in the early days. It was not done out of suspicion. It was done because knowing what you were dealing with was simply good sense. What the scans showed about the humans gave the science team a lot to talk about. Tavi filed the first detailed biological report early on the morning of the second day. She had stayed up most of the night going over the numbers. The report was thorough and careful, written in the precise, neutral language of scientific documentation. But even in that flat, careful language, certain things stood out. Human bones were dense. significantly denser than the bones of most known species. This made sense given the high gravity of their home planet. Their bodies had been shaped over many generations to carry more weight than most conclave species ever needed to deal with. Their muscles were arranged for endurance. Not for quick bursts of speed, but for sustained effort over long periods. Their hearts were large and strong, capable of pumping hard for hours under serious physical strain. Their lungs were efficient beyond what seemed strictly necessary for a civilized species, built for situations where clean air might not always be available. Their immune systems were, in Tavi's careful phrasing, highly aggressive and adaptive. They did not just fight infection. They remembered it. Every time the human body encountered something trying to make it sick, it cataloged the threat and built a specific response to it. The second time that same threat appeared, the body was ready before symptoms could even develop. Tavi noted that over the course of their evolutionary history, humans had been exposed to an extraordinary variety of pathogens, parasites, and environmental toxins. Their immune systems had responded by becoming, in effect, a constantly updating library of everything that had ever tried to kill them. There was more. Human skin was durable, not armored, not tough in the way of some species, but resilient in a way that suggested it had been shaped by an environment that regularly tried to damage it. Their eyes could function in a wide range of light conditions. Their bodies regulated temperature aggressively, using a system of surface perspiration that was, in terms of raw efficiency, better than almost anything the conclave had seen in a species of their size. And they healed fast. Not instantly, not dramatically, but at a rate that was notably higher than average for a species of their biological complexity. Tavi sat back from her data screen and looked at what she had written. She thought for a moment. Then she added a final note at the bottom of the report. The note said that from a biological standpoint, humanity fit most cleanly into the category the conclave's zoological databases called apex persistence predators. These were creatures that did not hunt by being the fastest or the strongest in any given moment. They hunted by being harder to stop than anything they were hunting. They were built to keep going. She flagged the report and sent it to the senior science staff. Meanwhile, Dr. Lena had noticed that the conclave's biologists kept glancing at her team during the morning session. She was not offended. She was curious. She walked over to where Tavi was sitting and asked, in a pleasant and direct way, what they were looking at. Tavi explained about the passive scans. Lena said that was fine and asked if they had found anything interesting. Tavi hesitated, then mentioned the bone density readings. Lena nodded and said that made sense. Earth's gravity was strong, she said, and humans had been living in it for a very long time. She mentioned a few other physical details without being asked: the temperature range humans could operate in without equipment, the altitude range, the pressure range. She mentioned that humans could go without food for a surprisingly long time before it became a real problem, and without sleep for a shorter but still notable time. She said all of this in the same easy tone someone uses to describe ordinary, unremarkable facts about themselves. Tavi listened carefully and then, after Lena had gone back to her side of the room, opened her report again and quietly updated the section on biological resilience. Cole, meanwhile, had spent the morning in a long conversation with Peyrev, the conclave's chief engineer. Cole had questions about the Serene Dawn's systems, technical, specific questions that went well beyond casual curiosity. He asked about the ship's drive efficiency at different energy outputs. He asked about the shielding tolerances on the forward hull. He asked why the sensor array was positioned where it was instead of somewhere else that he pointed to on a diagram, which Peyrev admitted would actually have been a more logical placement. Peyrev asked where Cole had gotten his engineering background. Cole said he had studied it formally and then spent 20 years fixing things that kept breaking in environments where it was not easy to get replacement parts. Peyrev, who had spent 40 years solving engineering problems for the most advanced civilization in the known galaxy, found himself in the unusual position of genuinely enjoying the conversation. That afternoon, Ray did something that nobody on the conclave crew noticed at first. He spent 2 hours sitting quietly in the corner of the observation chamber with a small handheld device, apparently reading. What he was actually doing was mapping. He had obtained a copy of the Serene Dawn's publicly available technical schematics from the ship's welcome data package, the standard information packet given to all diplomatic visitors, and he was going through them in detail, learning the layout of the ship, the location of key systems, the position of escape pods. He was not doing it with any hostile intent. He was doing it the way a person does when they have been trained that knowing your environment is the first step to surviving it. It was habit. It was the kind of habit that comes from growing up somewhere that taught you to always know your exits. Nina noticed what he was doing and caught his eye. He gave a small, slightly apologetic shrug. She gave a small nod that said she understood and it was fine. That evening Tavi presented her report to the senior science staff. She read the key findings out loud. The room was quiet while she spoke. When she reached the section about persistence predator biology, one of the older researchers asked her to read it again. She did. Nobody said much after that. Outside the observation windows, the alien vessel sat docked alongside the serene dawn, its hull reflecting the pale light of distant stars. Inside it, the humans were having dinner. The surveillance feed showed them talking and laughing, passing food between themselves, comfortable and easy in a ship that had carried them through the worst stretch of space in the known galaxy. One of them, Cole, was telling a story that was apparently very funny. The others were laughing hard. They looked, Tavi thought, like people who were simply having a good time. She looked back at her report. Then she looked at the screen again. Both things were true at the same time, and somehow that was the most interesting thing of all. Elder Thacid had not asked for a private meeting in many years. He was old enough and senior enough that when he wanted to know something, he usually found out through official channels or through the quiet network of contacts he had built up over his very long career. But on the morning of the third day, he sent a short message to Dr. Nina asking if she would be willing to speak with him alone, without aides or translators present except the automated system. Nina replied within 5 minutes and said yes. They met in a small conference room near the back of the Serene Dawn's diplomatic section. Thacid arrived first and arranged himself carefully in the wide, low chair that had been brought in to suit his body shape. He had 8 front tentacles and a broad, flat body, and he moved slowly but with great precision. Nina arrived exactly on time, poured herself a glass of water from the table without asking, sat down, and waited. Thacid appreciated that. He had spent a great deal of his life around people who filled silence with words because they were nervous. Nina did not do that. He began by asking how long humanity had been spacefaring. She told him, serious development had started roughly 200 years ago. The first crewed missions beyond their own planet had happened about 150 years before that. Thacid was quiet for a moment. 200 years was almost nothing in the history of the Conclave. Some of the legal disputes currently working their way through the Conclave's court system were older than humanity's entire spaceflight program. Then he asked the question his aides had told him not to ask. He asked what life on Earth had been like. Not the physical conditions, the biology team had already covered that in detail. He asked about the history. What had humans done with the thousands of years between the time they first started building civilizations and the time they first reached space? Nina looked at him for a moment. Then she answered honestly. She described wars. Not small ones, large ones, spanning whole continents, involving tens of millions of people, fought with weapons that got more and more destructive over time until her species had built things capable of ending civilization entirely. She described the period when those weapons existed and both sides of a global conflict held them pointed at each other and the whole world held its breath for decades, waiting. She described how that period had eventually ended without the weapons being used, not because anyone had become suddenly wise, but because neither side had wanted to be the one to start something neither side could finish. She described disease. Sicknesses that had moved through human populations before medicine existed, killing so many people in so short a time that entire cities had been emptied. And the long work, over generations, of understanding those diseases and learning how to stop them. She described what humans had done to their own planet. The way they had used its resources without thinking about the consequences, until the consequences became impossible to ignore. The generations of work that had followed, trying to repair damage that had taken only decades to cause. Thacid listened to all of it without moving. When she was done, he asked one more question. When your people first looked up at the stars, he said, and understood that they could reach them, what did they expect to find? Nina was quiet for a moment. Honestly, she said, most of us expected something like what we found. Old civilizations. Established systems. Something bigger and more organized than what we had. She paused. Some people hoped it would be friendly. Most of us figured it was smart to prepare for either possibility. Thacid spread all 8 of his front tentacles outward and held them open. It was the Murin gesture for deep and genuine respect. Nina recognized it from her briefing notes and gave a small, quiet nod. After the meeting, Thacid's aide found Nina in the corridor and asked if she had found the Elder's questions difficult. Nina said no. The aide asked if humanity was nervous about joining an organization as large and old as the Conclave. Nina said that humanity had a long history of walking into situations that were bigger and older and more complicated than it was, and finding a way to be useful. She said it simply, without any pride in it, the way someone states a plain fact. The aide wrote down, "finding a way to be useful," and underlined it twice in his notes. Cole, meanwhile, had spent the morning doing something nobody had asked him to do. The night before, he had read through the Conclave's technical documentation on their outer border beacon network, the system of signal markers that defined the edge of Conclave-controlled space. He had found 3 problems in it. Not small problems. Real ones. Signal degradation at certain frequencies. Encoding inefficiencies that dated back thousands of years and had simply never been updated. A positioning issue in the southern sector that meant the beacons there had a blind spot large enough to sail a ship through. He wrote up a set of proposed fixes. Clear, practical, step by step. He used materials and methods that were already available inside the Conclave's own supply systems, nothing exotic, nothing that would require new development. He submitted it to the Conclave's engineering division that morning as a courtesy document, not an official proposal. The engineering division spent 2 hours checking his math. Everything held up. They called a short internal meeting to discuss it. Then the division head, Payrev, went to find Cole and asked how long it had taken him to write the document. Cole said he had done it the previous evening as something to work on before going to sleep. Payrev stood very still for a moment. Then he asked, very carefully, if Cole would be willing to look at a few other problems they had been carrying on a list for a while. Cole said sure, and asked if they had anything to drink. Nina heard about the engineering document that afternoon and was not surprised. She had worked with Cole for 11 years. She knew how his mind operated. He saw a problem and he fixed it. He did not wait to be asked and he did not stop to wonder if it was his place to offer. It simply did not occur to him that there was any other reasonable response to seeing something broken. She thought about what Thacid had asked her. What had humans expected to find in the stars? She thought the honest answer was probably that they had not expected anything in particular, they had simply expected to deal with whatever they found, the same way they had always dealt with everything. One problem at a time. One day at a time. Stubborn and steady and quietly certain that things could be made better if you were willing to keep working at them. It was not a grand philosophy. It had not always led to good outcomes. But it had kept her species alive through everything the universe and their own worst impulses had thrown at them, and it had carried them through the void and into this room. She figured it would probably keep working a while longer. The vote happened on the 7th day. It was not the final step in the process. Full membership in the Galactic Conclave took years of formal review, legal agreement, and cultural exchange. But the provisional membership vote was the first real one. It was the one that said yes, we want to know you better. It was the one that opened the door. The result was 411 votes in favor, 12 abstentions, and 3 against. The 3 votes against came from smaller species delegations that cited the Conclave's own charter, which suggested 500 years of spaceflight as a baseline for evaluation. They were not wrong to cite it. The charter said what it said. But the charter had also been written 11,000 years ago, by species who had never imagined that a civilization barely 2 centuries old would cross the outer void on their first serious attempt and show up at the Conclave's door with engineering proposals and medical databases and a very calm attitude about the whole thing. The Thrak representative, Ven's elder cousin, voted against and then went and had a long conversation with Ven afterward. Ven told him what he had seen over the past week. The elder cousin listened carefully. He did not change his vote, the vote was already done, but he sat quietly for a long time after Ven finished speaking. The reception that followed the vote was warm by diplomatic standards. The Conclave's member species brought gifts. The Ossini brought woven sculptures made of light, delicate structures that moved slowly in the air and changed color depending on the angle you viewed them from. The Valorians brought a living mathematical poem, which was a Valorian art form that had no direct translation but that produced a deep physical sensation of calm and order in most beings that experienced it. Elder Thacid presented a carved stone that had been worked on by 3 generations of Murin craftspeople. It depicted the meeting between a tentacled figure and a 2-legged one, standing side by side at the edge of what was clearly meant to be the void. The humans brought gifts too. Dr. Lena handed the Conclave's medical division a data drive containing a complete catalog of every disease, parasite, and pathogen that humanity had ever encountered, along with detailed documentation of every treatment, vaccine, and cure that had been developed against them. It was thousands of years of medical history, organized and indexed and ready to use. She explained that Earth had been a difficult place to live in biological terms, and that humans had spent most of their history in a constant war against things trying to make them sick. They had won most of those battles. The data was the record of how. The chief of the Conclave's medical division spent 20 minutes reading through the catalog's index. Then he looked up at Lena and said that at least 4 of the treatment methods documented in the first section alone were more effective than anything currently in use in Conclave medical practice for equivalent conditions. Lena nodded and said she hoped it would be useful. The chief of medicine was quiet for a moment. He said it would be very useful. Cole gave the engineering division the complete technical schematics for the human vessel's drive system, including all the modifications the crew had made during the journey through the void. The notations in the document explained each change, why it had been made, what problem it had solved, what the results had been. Peyrev read through the whole thing twice. Then he called 2 of his senior engineers into his office, closed the door, and showed them the section on void transit shielding. The section described how the human crew had dealt with radiation levels that the Conclave's own models classified as unsurvivable for any known vessel design. They had not done it with new technology. They had done it with existing technology, rearranged and reinforced in ways that the Conclave's engineers had simply never tried because they had never needed to try. Because they had never gone into the void. One of Peyrev's senior engineers read the passage 3 times and then quietly said that 2 of the problems currently on the Conclave's long-term unsolvable list had probably just been solved. Peyrev told her to start the paperwork. That evening, Nina and Captain Alara shared a meal together in the small dining room off the Serene Dawn's main corridor. It was the last evening before the human vessel would detach and begin the long journey back to Earth. The food had been carefully prepared, dishes from both species, adjusted to be comfortable for the other. Neither of them said much about the food. Both of them said polite things about it. Both of them quietly ate around the parts that did not quite work. Ilara asked Nina what came next. Whether Earth would send more ships. Whether formal trade talks would begin. Whether humanity was ready for the long, complicated process of actually joining a civilization 11,000 years older than itself. Nina said yes to all of it. She said it would take time and there would be problems, because there always were. She said humanity was not always patient but was very good at being stubborn, and that those 2 qualities had gotten her species through most of the hard things it had faced. She was quiet for a moment, looking out through the small dining room window at the stars. You know what surprised us most about all of this, she said. Ilara asked what. How familiar it felt, Nina said. The politics. The old disagreements that nobody fully remembers the original cause of anymore. The species that have seen so much that they are surprised when something new shows up. We have all of that at home. We are used to working inside it. She paused. We will be fine. The human vessel departed the next morning. Ilara stood on the bridge and watched it go on the main screen. It moved with the easy, steady confidence of something that had made this trip before and was not worried about making it again. Its fusion torch burned bright and clean behind it. It got smaller on the screen, and then smaller still, and then it was just a point of light moving into the dark. Somewhere in the Conclave's archive system, a clerk was adding entry 417 to the official register of known spacefaring species. The entry listed all the standard information: homeworld classification, first contact date, biological category, technological level at time of contact. In the notes field at the bottom, the clerk paused for a moment. Then she typed a short personal observation, off the official record, the kind clerks sometimes added when they felt the standard fields did not quite capture the situation. She wrote, "I think they are going to change things." She did not say what things. She did not need to. She had read the reports. She had watched the footage from the 7 days of meetings. She had seen the engineering documents and the medical database and the schematics of a ship that had crossed the void and come home intact. She saved the entry, closed her screen, and went to make herself something to drink. Outside the station's observation windows, the galaxy turned slowly in the dark, the same as it always had. 11,000 years of order and history and careful, measured progress. And somewhere at its edge, pointed inward, a small bright light was moving steadily toward the center of it all.